Hello and welcome back to the Introduction to Ansible section of this course. In this video, we're going to be going over Ansible inventory. That Ansible has a method of defining Ansible managed devices and grouping those devices, and using this definition to be able to run your playbooks and modules on a very specific group of devices or a subset thereof. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how to create those groups and define them in a file, as well as where the default group is located and how to limit those, either to a specific subset that you define or a retry subset from failed devices that may have failed during a previous playbook execution. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. First up, our default inventory location is the /etc/ansible/hosts file. That this is on a Linux machine or a Unix-like box, right? Is that our /etc file or folder, and then our Ansible folder within there, and then our hosts file. Now, you can specify a separate inventory file during your playbook execution, or within your ansible.cfg file, you can specify a different default inventory file. That the ansible.cfg file, our main configuration file, is located within the /etc/ansible directory. So our managed devices within the inventory file are defined as IP addresses or host names. It's important to note that a host name must be resolvable by the Ansible management node. So the Ansible management server that you are running these playbooks on or have your inventory defined on, this needs to be able to resolve any host names. So either within its own hosts file or by DNS through the DNS server that is using for resolution, it needs to be able to resolve those host names. Otherwise, you need to specify all of your inventory by IP addresses. So host groups are named. So we would have a routers group, or a switch group, or perhaps a SRX group, right? They are named groups rather than group 1, group 2, that you can actually specify names, and that these contain one or more hosts or groups. That we'll get into the different specification of what needs to be done if it contains one or the other in the following slide here. That hosts and groups can be members of one or more groups. So you can have nested grouping, and they can also be members of multiple different groups. If I have my 192.168.1.2 node, and this is a SRX router, then I can have it be a member of the routers group and also of the SRX group, so that I can specify both of these. Now, it does feel a little redundant, right? But in your particular environment, you might find a reason to have perhaps, ISP routers as a group. And perhaps this device is an ISP router as part of that group, and he also happens to be an SRX. Maybe you also have MX devices, and that this could have been a MX204 and within the MX group as well instead. So host and group variables may be stored in the inventory file or in separate files. So you can have specific variables for specific groups and also specific variables for specific hosts. That these specific variables to be used within your playbook can be specified and stored within the inventory or within separate files. Excellent. So let's move on a little bit here and talk about what the inventory file really looks like and its structure. So here we have a example that I just did cat, right, to go ahead and write out the contents of a file and did it of the hosts file within etc Ansible directory. So this is our default inventory file, right? We can have comments within our inventory file. Any line that begins with a hash or a pound sign, that this starts a comment line. Our groups are defined by putting some characters between these two square brackets, that defines the name of our group, and then any items below that, either IP addresses or host names, are the members of that group. We can also use some expressions within our host names or IP addresses, as we did here, to define many items within one line. This would be 192.168.2.200 through 203. So this would be 200, 201, 202, and 203. That within these square brackets defines all numbers inclusive on both ends. Similarly, we can do an expression like this to where we have core SW01 and 02, both defined by these two items here. And as we see down here, this is how you define a host name within your group, and the host name needs to be resolvable. In this particular case, we have our hosts file here on our Linux box. So I'm just doing the content right out of our /etc/hosts file. We have our local host and Ansible-lab for our own host name here on our Ansible management node. And then we have that VMX1 is also defined here as 192.168.2.203. And because that is resolvable, we are able to use that within our inventory file. So in order to have a group of groups, to have nested groups, our group that contains groups must have the :children on the end of the group name. This is so that the names within this group are known to be other groups and not host names of individual inventory nodes. And because of this, a group of groups can only have groups within it. You cannot have individual inventory items within that group. So here we have our routers group, which contains groups because of the :children, and the two groups that are within this routers group are VSRX and MX. So we have here our MX group and our VSRX group. And then we also have our core group. That is a group of groups because of the :children there. Man, group of groups is really fun to say. And it contains the routers group and the EX group. Excellent. So this is how you would organize and how you would structure your inventory file. This is all text. There is no indentation going on here. There is simply places where we have square brackets to go ahead and define either expressions or group names, and we have the :children on the end of a group name within our square brackets to define a group of groups. And that's all we need to know as the JNCIA DevOps, and that's how we'll be looking at the structure of our inventory files. So let's take a little look at how we use our inventory files. So our inventory can either be in our default inventory file. Recall our /etc/Ansible/hosts file is our default inventory file. And if no inventory is file specified, that's what we'll be using. Otherwise, we specify a custom inventory file with the -I flag. In addition to -i, we can also limit the hosts that will be used within that inventory file or in our default inventory file as well, right? That we can either limit to some group name like we have in this location, or we can limit to some IP address or host like we have here, or we can specify a file which contains a list of hosts that we would like to limit to. In this case, we are using the @retry hosts text file. Now, this would be generated in the event a playbook fails, and that you generate a list of hosts that the playbook failed on, and that these are ones that we're looking to retry our playbook against to see if that completes successfully. And just note that we are using the @ symbol here to specify that file name. In this case, the file is within the same directory that we are running our Ansible playbook command against, as well as the same directory where the getbgp.yml playbook is located. Excellent. I appreciate you going through this with me. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.